I've always thought that part of the fun of being a skeptic is changing your mind when you get evidence that suggests that a closely held belief you hadn't examined before actually isn't grounded in reality. This might be a surprise to you, but I'm not perfect. And I'm sure that I have plenty of unsubstantiated beliefs lurking around in my head. But I do think I'm a little weird in that I don't get angry when I'm forced to overturn a belief. Generally, I get this funny little thrill out of it. Like, I used to 100% believe that sugar makes kids hyperactive. Until I looked into it and I found that there's absolutely no evidence for that. In fact, not a single major study has been able to find a link between sugar and hyperactivity. But when we see kids at a birthday party eat a bunch of cake and ice cream and then run around like maniacs, we tend to blame the sugar as opposed to the bouncy castle or the clown or just the thrill of being around your friends. When I learned about that, I thought, wow, that's really cool. It can be tougher to find that weird little thrill when the belief is something that I feel is more tied to who I am as a person, but I do still get it. Like, I got a little thrill when I realized that the religion I was raised in is based on nothing but hot 7th century BCE gossip. Or when I learned that needle exchange programs are actually beneficial to society. I didn't believe that until I saw the evidence. Or when I learned that psychics are scammers. Like, I wanted to believe psychics were real, and it just wasn't true. And that was a little disappointing, but I still got that thrill that like, oh, cool. Anyway, I got one of those weird little thrills this week from something that I've believed for more than a decade turning out to be not as true as I originally thought. In my early days as a skeptic, I was introduced to the concept of false memories. It's the idea that a person might claim to remember something that never actually happened. Due to a variety of reasons, from just making a simple mistake, misremembering something, up to the memory actually being implanted in them by a nefarious actor. Back in 2011, I met Elizabeth Loftus at the Amazing Meeting in Las Vegas, where she gave a talk about her work on memory. Loftus is a psychologist who is possibly best known for a series of experiments known as the Lost in a Mall study, in which she interviewed subjects and described 4 purported memories from their childhood, like between the ages of 4 and 6, that she had related to her by the subject's parents. But one of those stories was completely made up by Loftus. She told the subjects that, according to their parents, when they were 5 years old or so, they got lost in a mall. They were very scared. They were frantically looking for their parent. Eventually, they were found. They were then asked how clearly they could picture each of the memories. And in some experiments, they were asked to describe the memories. And what she found was that a significant number of people assumed that the mall memory was a real one, despite the fact that it was made up. It was something like almost a quarter of subjects believed that that was a real memory. This study and others led to Elizabeth Loftus becoming a frequent expert witness in many court cases, such as the McMartin preschool trial from the early 1980s, in which parents accused the teachers and administrators of a preschool of sexually abusing their children, often as part of satanic rituals. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But really, at the time, in 2011, when I met Loftus, I thought of her as an accomplished researcher who was doing something really beneficial for society. Especially considering how often people in the United States and elsewhere are convicted of crimes due to flawed eyewitness testimony. For instance, Rafael Ruiz was in prison for 25 years for raping a woman who had identified him as her assailant. But the victim later said that police had actually pressured her into choosing him out of the lineup. Ruiz was eventually cleared of the crime thanks to DNA evidence. This happens incredibly often. Witnesses can be manipulated, pressured, and misled by well-meaning police officers who think that they have the right person and just need the eyewitness testimony to seal the deal. The cops can even manipulate a suspect into believing that they committed a murder that they did not commit, or at least confessing to a murder that they did not commit, like what happened in the case of the West Memphis Three. If you've never seen the documentary Paradise Lost, The Child Murders at Robin Hood Hills, I highly recommend you just, pause this video right now and go watch it. It's brilliant. But spoiler alert for a 25-year-old documentary about true events, one of the accused murderers was Jesse Miskelly, a very low IQ teenager who confessed to the murders after he was grilled by police officers for hours. He got nearly all of the details about the crime scene wrong, but he kept changing his story to whatever he thought the cops wanted to hear, and he was convicted for it. So it's important to conduct research on the fallibility of human memory, especially when it can have such far-reaching consequences like these court cases. I was aware of, at the time, Loftus and also groups like the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, which included Loftus on their board, as well as other famous skeptics like James Randi and Martin Gardner, who I respected immensely. And it was also affiliated with the Center for Skeptical Inquiry. Their goal, as I understood it, was to stop the conviction of people accused of crimes they did not commit based on faulty eyewitness testimony, particularly when it came to cases of child sexual abuse and incest. And that was the totality of my opinion of Elizabeth Loftus and other skeptical researchers who investigated false memories. Until this week, when I read a new article in New York Magazine titled The Memory War. And let me tell you, I got that weird little thrill out of realizing that, oops, Elizabeth Loftus might not be so great, and the False Memory Syndrome Foundation is absolutely fucked up. My first surprise from this article was when they casually mentioned that Elizabeth Loftus testified in favor of Ted Bundy at the trial that he had before he escaped imprisonment and then murdered several other people. Now, that doesn't mean that she's wrong about everything, but when I read that, I was like, well, she was wrong about one very big thing, Ted Bundy, right? Katie Heaney, who is the writer of the New York Magazine piece, just throws out that Bundy connection. But I've since read up on that, and I realized that how Heaney categorized that was actually kind of shitty and unfair and poisoning the well. And I want to put that out at the top here as I'm talking about this. According to a very good overview I read of the Ted Bundy case, and Loftus's specific role in that case, the witness who identified Bundy changed loads of details in her story after she was shown a photo of Bundy. The cops showed her 2 photos of Ted Bundy. They corrected her on the color of his car and the color of his shoes and fixed up other details before they finally showed her a lineup of a bunch of men and Ted Bundy. Bundy was the only one in the lineup whose photo she had seen several times, including seeing it in the newspaper about her case. And so she picked Bundy, and it absolutely sounds like she mostly picked him because she was primed to. The fact that the cops were correct that Ted Bundy was the perpetrator is kind of incidental to the larger point. So I do think that was really unfair. But Heaney does go on to describe the founding of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, a history that I was previously completely ignorant of, to my embarrassment, that I just sort of quietly supported this foundation. I never gave them money or anything, but in my head I thought, yep, they're doing good work, without ever really looking into it. But according to Heaney, The False Memory Syndrome Foundation was created by Pam Floyd after her daughter Jennifer privately informed her that Pam's husband, Jennifer's father, Peter Floyd, had molested her for about a decade up until she was in her teens. There's a lot of shit to unpack, so I suggest that you just read the article. But essentially, Pam decided that Jennifer's claim was baseless and that it was a memory that had been recovered under hypnosis, which is a claim that Jennifer vehemently denies happened. Pam wrote an anonymous account of Jennifer's accusation in which she claimed that this victim was actually completely screwed up psychologically and lying. And then she published that, sent the final product to Jennifer's colleagues with a little note explaining that the anonymous person in the article was in fact Jennifer. That's super fucked up. Especially considering that Jennifer herself stated that she just wanted to keep everything private. She just needed time to process what she says her father had done to her. But her parents decided to make it public. And then they started this foundation. Pam coined the term false memory syndrome, despite having no input from psychologists who might be able to determine whether or not this qualifies as an actual disorder. And then she created her nonprofit. She and her husband were aided in the creation of the foundation by psychologists Ralph Underwager and his wife, Helida Wakefield. A few years after they all created this foundation, Underwager and Wakefield would give an interview to a Dutch pro-pedophilia magazine in which Underwager says that pedophilia is a responsible choice, an acceptable expression of God's will for love and unity among human beings. Yeah, not a great way to start off your anti-incest victim organization. It turns out a lot of the other board members weren't much better. For instance, and you can go to the foundation's website and they have all of these profiles still up, and it's kind of disturbing, despite the fact that the foundation packed it in at the end of 2019. But one of their board members, Dr. Rosalind Cartwright, wrote in her bio on the website that she got involved in the foundation because a friend and colleague had an adult daughter in therapy accuse him of childhood sexual abuse. It was my best judgment that this was unbelievable of the person I knew and could only have been induced by the therapist. Yikes. That's just like when Lawrence Krauss said that there's no way Jeffrey Epstein could be running a child sex trafficking ring because he always seemed like such a stand-up guy. Super awkward. Heaney found some more disturbing information about the foundation in their archives over at the Center for Skeptical Inquiry, like how Pam seemed to assume that every accused pedophile who joined the organization was innocent. In one article titled, "How Do We Know That We Are Not Representing Pedophiles?" she explains, "We're a good-looking bunch of people, graying hair, well-dressed, healthy, smiling. Just about every person who has attended is someone you would surely find interesting and want to count as a friend." Well, I guess that does it then. No pedophiles here. There's so much more in the New York article. And again, I highly recommend that you read it. But at the same time, I do think it's important to note that it veers into extremely unfair territory at times. Like, I already mentioned the Ted Bundy thing, but also I think it's a little baffling that Heaney didn't spend just a little more time on the good that memory researchers, including Elizabeth Loftus, have done. Heaney mentions the satanic ritual child abuse panic only twice. Once to say that the foundation was created on the heels of it, and a sentence later to point out that Underwager and Wakefield had been involved in it. But it really deserves its own write-up because it's a big fucking deal. I'll give you the quick overview. Back in the 1980s, women were heading to work in bigger and bigger numbers, which led to an explosion in the number of daycare centers that were popping up, and also an explosion in the concern trolling over these awful, selfish, ambitious bitches who were abdicating their motherly duty, abandoning their children to strangers while they themselves go off and make money. These anxieties boiled over into an honest-to-God mass hysteria. One of the most prominent cases happened in Manhattan Beach, California, when a woman claimed that her son had been sodomized by a teacher at the McMartin preschool. The mother also claimed that the teacher had flown through the air like a demon and that the school administrator had drilled holes under a child's arms. Despite these being obvious fantasies of a diseased mind, the police in the case sent all of the parents of children at the school a letter telling them that that specific teacher had been accused of sexual assault and asking the parents to ask their children if any of them had ever been sodomized or had oral sex or a laundry list of other very specific, very graphic sexual activities. While the scientific evidence for the idea of repressed memories that suddenly pop up years later is a little thin, there's actually heaps and heaps of scientific evidence that shows that children are incredibly easy to manipulate, even accidentally. For instance, if you ask them a nonsense question like, is red heavier than yellow? They will give you a yes or no answer because that's what they think you want. But hey, idiot kid, light doesn't have mass. Jesus, children are morons. And if you ask kids the same question over and over again, there's a chance that they're going to change their answer each time because they assume you keep asking because they gave you the wrong answer at first, and they want to give you the right answer. So if you have a bunch of parents going to their 4-5-year-old children and saying, did your teacher do these specific terrible things to you? There's a very good chance that some of the kids are going to say yes, either the first time or the second time or the 100th time they're asked. And that's what happened. Kids said that they were sexually abused. They also said that they had flown around in hot air balloons, that they saw witches get involved. And I shit you not, some of them said that Chuck Norris was one of the sexual abusers. Like, yes, Chuck Norris is probably a Nazi sympathizer, but I don't think he was raping preschoolers back in the early 80s. Some kids even said that they were molested in tunnels beneath the school, prompting authorities to excavate the fucking property. No tunnels were found, including any tunnels that might have been concealing Chuck Norris. This all sounds absurd, I know, and it is, but the teachers and administrators at the heart of it were arrested in 1984, and they weren't exonerated until 1990. That's 6 years of hellish torture. And by the way, the mom who originally made the first accusation, well, shortly after she made those claims, she was hospitalized for acute paranoid schizophrenia. And in 1986, she died of chronic alcoholism. That was before they had even finished the preliminary hearings. Elizabeth Loftus and other researchers are the reason why these innocent people were eventually exonerated. And they're also the reason why we today have new restrictions on how the police interrogate both witnesses and suspects and why they have to record those interrogations. I'm very glad that Heaney wrote this piece because it showed me that a movement I previously fully supported is much, much more complicated and at times nefarious than I thought. Like on the one hand, I had no idea Elizabeth Loftus, her early experiments have been heavily criticized by fellow psychologists for very good reasons. But more importantly, I had no idea that the False Memory Syndrome Foundation was so thoroughly screwed up. In retrospect, it makes sense that people who advocate against false convictions would be easy targets for actual guilty rapists to use to their advantage. And they're particularly susceptible if the organization itself is founded by people who might also be guilty of those crimes. But what's important is that we not throw out the baby with the bathwater. While there is no consensus among psychologists about the nature of so-called recovered memories and false memories, It's undeniable that memory can be manipulated and that has led to the imprisonment of innocent people. It's equally undeniable that many victims of child abuse don't speak out until they're adults, and the details they report might be mistaken or they might change as they explore those memories. We need more research to figure out how to find and stop perpetrators of child abuse without sweeping up innocent people along the way due to faulty memories.